So at the end of last year, we revealed that the Premier had played a role in facilitating in the decision-making of a grant to the Australian Clay Target Association of $5.5 million. And that raised questions then about whether the Premier herself had a conflict of interest potentially in awarding a grant that Mr Maguire stood to gain a political benefit from. Now, shortly after we revealed that, ICAC announced it was undertaking further investigative steps in its inquiry. And from what we've known for many months now, that they've been discreetly behind the scenes requesting documents about this grant. And we've followed up our reporting this year as well and revealed more details about the Premier's role in that. We revealed that Darryl Maguire wrote to the Premier about it, kicking the whole grant process off. And it appears that this has now become a key focal point for ICAC in its investigation now into the Premier herself.
Now, so that goes to the first point that they made there in terms of this ICAC investigation. The second point they say, whether this constituted or involved dishonest exercise, it basically sums up in terms of, am I right in saying that she perhaps wasn't as upfront with ICAC as they wanted?
I mean, it's difficult to sort of know exactly what ICAC is referring to in its entirety, and I suspect much will become clear if and when ICAC holds further public hearings, which they may well do. But a good deal of the issues and the consideration go to the Premier making decisions that Mr Maguire stood to benefit from. Now, the reason that's important is because it goes to the status and nature of the relationship between Mr Maguire and Miss Berejiklian at the time. Now, of course, the Premier has defended herself. She said there was nothing unusual about the way this grant was managed or in any others, and you've certainly heard from her press conference as well that she's made it clear that she continues to deny any wrongdoing. But it's certainly, this is only the beginning of the next chapter, I would say.
Paul, we're just going to bring in state political reporter Ashleigh now. Now, Ashleigh, as we say, this huge breaking news this afternoon. There was talk of it, though, as I understand it, in Parliament about a half hour before.
Yes, well, it was when, as soon as the ICAC put out that release saying that the Premier was going to be the subject of an investigation and they were going to do a closer look at some of those the dealings and those projects that were connected to her ex-boyfriend Darryl Maguire. There was much speculation as to what the Premier would do and that she really only had one choice, and that was to resign. So she held a press conference at 1 o'clock. She only read a statement. She took no questions, and in that statement she announced that she was left with no choice but to resign, and she's also going to leave Parliament as well. So there will be a by-election in her seat. Now, she has defended her actions and saying that she maintains that she has done nothing wrong and that these are historical allegations, and they do go to her time when she was the Transport Minister, when she was the Treasurer and the Premier, and when she was in, at that time, a secret relationship. And now, Gladys Berejiklian has weathered a lot to do with Darryl Maguire when last year it became public that she was in this secret relationship, but she survived then. But it's now further investigation that has ended her career in Parliament.
Yeah, and Ashleigh, she made the point that as Premier, she can't simply step aside.
Well, this is what it comes down to as well. There have been other MPs that have been under investigation, and they have, they've gone to the crossbench or they've, resigned from their portfolios. Whereas as Premier, you can't really do that. You can't wait in the wings. So that isn't an option for Gladys Berejiklian. And so she said also to provide certainty and to give clear air to the next leader, especially at this crucial time. You can't forget here in New South Wales that we're 14 weeks into lockdown and we're about to embark on starting to reopen, where we're going to see pressure on our hospital system and so on. So there is a time where it is a time for strong leadership. And that can't be done with a Premier who's sort of aside or temporarily on leave. So we really need now a new Premier for New South Wales, and for certainty, especially at this time, we need that as soon as possible here in this state.
Paul, these questions about whether it was appropriate for Gladys Berejiklian to be leading the state as Premier did come up last time in terms of the ICAC investigation, didn't they?
Yeah, they did, and in fact there were even some members of the New South Wales Liberal Party who even made objections to the Premier continuing in her role. And the position they put forward is that the Premier simply has to be above reproach, and that even from what emerged in the public hearings last year, when the Premier was not a focus of those inquiries, was certainly in the minds of some people, and certainly in the minds of the many integrity experts who have talked about this, to raise significant probity issues about the Premier. And I think it's really important that we don't forget that this is really, the first leader of the state or the country really has to be absolutely above reproach. There should be no questions about their integrity whatsoever.
And yet that brought on so many questions, didn't it, in terms of it was said that other Liberal MPs had said behind the scenes, she's too good to lose.
Yeah, and I think certainly, this time a year ago, the Premier was in perhaps one of the most powerful political positions of any Premier in New South Wales in certainly many, many decades. And she was certainly of the view that she could weather whatever was to come. Obviously, that is, now that ICAC's made it clear that she is the focus of their inquiry, I mean, things have gotten real and serious, and she stepped down.
Resolute there at the end of the conference, saying that she has always acted with the highest level of integrity. So perhaps giving us a hint of, what is to come with the ICAC inquiry.
Well, exactly. But I think we'll leave that up to ICAC and what it determines in the end.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we're coming out the other end of it now, but we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and Gladys Berejiklian has been that figurehead steering New South Wales through it. Do we have any idea about who would replace her?
Look, I mean, there are all kinds of names that get thrown up in the corridors of Parliament, and I mean, certainly some of the senior ministers, the Treasurer, have all been thrown around, and they may well all be candidates. So, but look, my domain isn't political reporting. I'm just interested in investigating these things and making sure that our leaders are held to account.
Yeah, let's bring back in our political reporter, Ashleigh there. Well, Ashleigh, do we have any ideas from Parliament there as to who would replace the Premier?
Look, there's obviously a lot of discussions happening right now. Now, Dominic Perrottet, who is the Treasurer, has always been the heir apparent, but he is from the right. Now, it's the moderates which are the dominant faction, which is the faction that Gladys Berejiklian has come from in New South Wales. So there's going to have to be some deals done if Dominic Perrottet is to take that position. But there's also other people, like the Planning Minister, Rob Stokes, has always wanted the job. He wanted it, in fact, when Gladys Berejiklian took it last time after Mike Baird resigned. So he's always had an interest in that. Now, he is a moderate, but then also, as it goes, there'd have to be also deals done with the centre-right to make that happen. Some other names is Stuart Ayres could potentially be a candidate as well. Now, he's a Western Sydney MP from Penrith, which is obviously one of the areas that's been really hard hit by the lockdown here, and he's also a moderate too. Now, he's not really the front runner, but he is a possibility. So too is the Transport Minister, Andrew Constance. Now, he also has a profile. He has quite a national profile as well, from the bushfires in the summer of 2019-2020, because it was his area that was really hard hit. Now, we do know that they have been eyeing the job, but it's just how this is all going to work out now. And when Gladys Berejiklian came forward for a press conference, she had three of her big supporters there. She had the Environment Minister, Matt Keane, who's also a very close ally and does the numbers in that moderate faction. There was also Victor Dominello, the the Customer Service Minister, and also Brad Hazzard, the Health Minister, and they were looking shell-shocked at what has happened. So I think this has come as a surprise. Look, there has been lots of talk about this potentially happening, but for it to happen today and at this stage, especially as the government is dealing with so many issues around the lockdown as well, I think there's going to be it'll be very interesting how this afternoon plays out.
Yeah, Nash, can you give us a sense of the atmosphere in terms of, with this announcement being made obviously by the Premier of her resignation, and also before that with that release from ICAC? Yes, look, I think there has been that level of, I think so many people have been shocked, but it hasn't come necessarily as a surprise. There had been no finality to the Darryl Maguire investigation with
the ICAC, and in December last year they had announced that they were looking at it again, and there were always those questions whether the Premier was perhaps going to be implicated further in that investigation. So there had been a lot of rumours and gossip, as there is so much in the corridors of Parliament House. And look, and this was discussed a couple of weeks ago. There was this big theory that perhaps there were going to be private hearings when Gladys Berejiklian announced that she wouldn't be available for the 11 o'clock press conference that was happening daily throughout the lockdown. So look, there has been a lot of speculation and talk that perhaps this day would come, and now it has come though, and it seems that, you know, in terms of numbers, that there's not an heir apparent just to step up, that, you know, it's not just all in place ready for a smooth transition here.
Ashleigh Raper there, thank you. And Paul, final thoughts on just this huge news this afternoon?
Yeah, I think there is just one really important thing that it's just important to remember about all this, and that's that at the end of the day, what ICAC is fundamentally looking at is how the Premier has used public funds. That's our money, that's yours and mine and all the taxpayers out there, and that's a really, really important and incredibly significant thing, and it shouldn't be underestimated, you know, the gravity of this. I'm sure there might be some that say, oh, it's a, you know, $5.5 million grant, you know, who cares, whatever. But at the end of the day, the Premier has to be above reproach. All senior ministers should be above reproach, and we'll certainly continue to make sure that that they maintain that very important and high bar.
And plenty more questions of the Premier to come. As you said, she won't be addressing us as Premier anymore, but she certainly will be being questioned by ICAC.
No doubt, exactly. So, you know, we can certainly, we anticipate, it seems very likely that they will hold further public hearings, and, you know, there'll be perhaps many of the questions that we've sought answers to over the last 8 to 9 months will finally be answered.
Well, Gladys Berejiklian's resignation comes as the state continues to battle its major COVID outbreak, and she expressed regret at not being able to see out that task.
My only regret will be not to be able to finish the job to ensure the people of New South Wales transition to living freely with COVID. However, I'm extremely confident that whoever succeeds me will be more than capable to continue this job. Please give them your trust and confidence. We will come through this period stronger, more resilient, and appreciating what really matters in life.
Paul, this is such a key time in terms of New South Wales coming out of this pandemic, but still very much in it. I note that the ICAC investigation will resume on the 18th of October. That actually could very well be the double-dosed 80% mark, or if not a week before that. So at precisely the time that it was really expected to be, or will expected to be, positive news for the state, who was our Premier, will be fronting the Corruption Commission. Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be an extraordinary and a bizarre few weeks. There's no doubt about that. But you know, the timing of these things, you know, happens as it does. I mean, presumably ICAC reached a point in its investigation where it decided that it had enough evidence and it had amassed enough indications that there were some quite serious integrity questions around the Premier and her role in these grants, and that's why they chose to take action at this time. I guess what's important is that, yes, the Premier has been the figurehead of the pandemic response in New South Wales, but you know, we have extraordinary teams of public servants all around the state. They'll continue doing their jobs, whoever happens to be Premier.
Other premiers have gone for less than this. As we know, it was a shock to many when Farrell stepped down over what people say was simply a bottle of wine. So for those who don't follow these proceedings too closely, it's a Friday afternoon in New South Wales. We'll be learning that the Premier, that has been the Premier throughout this pandemic and before, is now no longer. It's going to come as quite a shock for many, isn't it? Yeah,
I mean, look, it was quite a shock to me. I was on annual leave having a long weekend, like a lot of people were, and there we go. So, yeah, but, and you know, I think that will be difficult for some people who have become so accustomed to seeing the Premier's, you know, face and presence on TV. But at the end of the day, integrity has to matter above all else.
Paul, thank you.
Thanks so much.